All right, Todd Rose, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you are a co-author of a book called Dark Horse, Achieving Success Through the Pursuit of Fulfillment. So the book's all about this. It's all about people who gain success through unconventional ways. Before that, let's juxtapose that with how people typically think or achieve success. You call this in the book, you call this path to success that we've all heard about, know about, and probably followed, the Standardization Covenant. What does the Standardization Covenant look like in your eyes?
Well, when I think about what success looks like in our standardized systems, it is basically you know the destination, you know what you're going to go after, you work really hard and you stay the course. You show grit, determination, but in the end, it really is about trying to compete to be the same as everybody else, only better. And it has very little to do with who you are and what you really care about.
So this is basically the path that's been set out for almost, I would say, 60, 70 years, since the end of World War II, probably. You go to college, you get a job, you do really well at your job, you'll go up the hierarchy, and eventually you can retire with a gold watch and drive a Cadillac.
Exactly. And by the way, like we call it a corporate ladder for a reason. There's a one path and you climb as high as you can go, but you're competing against everyone else for the exact same prize.
And that corporate ladder goes all the way down to, like, you start learning this in elementary school. Like, you understand, like, people get ranked in certain orders based on how well you are. And as you said, everyone's doing the exact same thing, but they're just doing it better.
Yeah. Well, and it's on purpose. So the idea of this Standardization Covenant is, as a society, at the beginning of the industrial age, we basically gave up on our individuality and we said, look, it's just more manageable if a few people control the system and we decide what the paths are like and what the criteria is, and we can kind of manage it. We only need, say, 3 ballerinas, or we need 5 engineers, whatever. And it's less about you and what you're capable of and more about filling some preordained slots.
Right. It's for the standardization was developed to benefit institutions like
right.
Government, corporations, even if like a ballet could be an institution as well. You just need certain slots, and we're going to look for the cream of the crop.
Right. As they see it. Yeah.
But while that's still going on, we still hear this talk about you need to find fulfillment in your work. And the Standardization Covenant talks about this, but they talk about it in different ways. How do you achieve fulfillment or a sense of purpose within this, where you're just doing what everyone else is doing, but only better?
Yeah. I think everybody wants, in an ideal world, they want to be successful and happy, right? They want to live fulfilled lives. And, what we've been taught is that if you just fit the mold, climb the ladder, and actually achieve excellence within the system, that fulfillment comes as a consequence of that. In some ways you can think, well, maybe that's true. If I'm excellent, I'll be fulfilled as well. But I think what we're seeing now is generations of people who have actually arrived at that place and realize, look, I made it according to society, but I'm deeply unhappy. I'm not fulfilled. And so I think the game is up.
Yeah, I think everyone's met those people who've achieved success in their field. Doctors, surgeons, attorneys, the top of their field, making lots of money, and they're just miserable.
Yeah. And it's like the worst part about it, which is to say, well, that's nice. You're doing something that you're obviously good at, but you get one life. And, in a sense, like, we're here and our ability to live a life. And what you really want are people who are able to find passion and convert that into purpose and turn that purpose into contribution and achievement. And it's just, what we find is that it's just really hard to do at scale if you've standardized the whole system.
And the other part of the Standardization Covenant is that you have to know, like, you have to work at what you're doing for a long time to get there, perhaps, right? And you have to know where you want to go at a really young age, like when you're 18. It's like, well, you go to college, well, okay, you need to pick out what your major you're going to study, and this is where you're going to go into your career. If you're going to medical school, you have to know that you're going to be in school for 7 years. Even if you have no experience with medicine, you might find out you might not like it, but if you want to do that, you sort of have to grit it out and keep doing it.
You're going to find out the hard way and either suffer through a life. Like, I actually have a friend who's a very, very good lawyer who confided in me not too long ago that he wished he had chosen a different profession. And I kept thinking, but he's got student loan debt. He makes pretty good money, so he can't really, to start over. And you think, wow, like, how sad is that because you achieved, you're sort of trapped. And I think we do this at such an early age. Those of us, I have two boys, and like, but the number of times people ask them, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And they're like, "I'm like 14. Why are you asking me this?" As if somehow, if you haven't already nailed down which of these predetermined destinations you're going to strive for, something's wrong with you.
Right. And you highlight research in our book that, our personalities aren't even really set, or just not till our mid to late 20s, right? So it's like you're asking an 18-year-old whose adult brain is still developing, hey, you got to pick the career that you're going to do when you're 40, when you might be a completely different person, and you're going to be stuck with that.
Right. You think about, we're constantly changing the things that matter to us and who we are, especially at that age. And then the reality is that the environment's changing. So if I decide, yeah, I'm going to be a lawyer or whatever, but why am I making that choice? Is it because I have an uncle that's a lawyer, or because I'm told that this is the safe sort of path and it's respectable? You think about all the really interesting sort of careers right now. You think about like something like an app developer. That idea didn't even exist 12, 13 years ago. That wasn't a thing. It's like the idea that you're somehow going to peg in your mind something 15, 20 years down the road and then go that direction. The reason it's so toxic is that it takes your eye off of what you should be focused on, which is maximizing the opportunities in front of you based on who you really are.
And another part of the standardization covenant that you write about in detail in the book is that it rests on the premise of meritocracy, right? That we reward talent and hard work. But you and your co-author make this really compelling case that meritocracies, or at least how they are in the standardization covenant, where there's this ladder you follow, doesn't really reward talent and hard work. Explain that.
Yeah. So look, the one we have right now, and by the way, it's pretty timely given the college admissions scandal and the kind of things going on, where it's pretty clear it's not just simply about who deserves to be there, but when you have a standardized system. So think about right now, if we just use the college example, it's not really how talented you are. Picasso wouldn't have got into Stanford's visual arts program unless he had great SAT scores. It doesn't matter what else he had to offer. So we've narrowed this thing down to a single dimension or a couple of things, and we're not trying to understand what people are good at. We're just basically force ranking them. The SAT is bell curved. It guarantees half the people fail, even if they're all qualified. When you think about like most of these institutions, like universities, they have a scarcity model of quality. They're trying to educate as few people as possible, and then they call that quality. And so basically, we end up getting ranked on one dimension on something they've decided, and then they pick a few people and they call that good. But the reality is we have a lot more to offer. People are deeply individual. Our talents are far more expansive than what fits on a single test. And if we were serious about helping people really develop their talents and make contributions, we certainly wouldn't create this kind of system.
So, okay, the standardization covenant is this idea that we've all sort of been enmeshed in since childhood, that you go up the ladder, you get the degree, you do all the things so you can be better than everyone else, so you can get whatever at the end, right? You talk about something called the dark horse covenant. What is the dark horse covenant?
So it's a different social contract. And I'll just tell you as background, like the point of the book was, as you said at the start, we just started studying people who were incredible at what they do, but who didn't follow the standardized path, and just trying to figure out who are these people and how do they do it? Is it just like dumb luck? Nobody should listen to them at all? Or might there be some things we could learn? And, the book is really about the fact that, in fact, there are some common things that really make them capable of pursuing a different kind of life. So out of that, you realize, wait a minute, if it's not just about these folks, it's about all of us, then we can start thinking about, wait, what kind of covenant would we make with ourselves as a people if we wanted to live more fulfilling lives? And the dark horse covenant is simply this. Instead of, know your destination, work hard, and just stay that standardized course, it is about harnessing your individuality in the pursuit of fulfillment to achieve excellence. And the difference there is pretty stark, that it is about knowing who you are. Like, your individuality matters, and it's not selfishness. It's just your distinctiveness. And you would have an obligation to actually convert that into a fulfilling life and then make a contribution with that. And in return, our society owes you the creation of good fit, We owe you that we create good educational environments that actually match who you are and help develop you rather than just batch process you. And we create contexts at work that allow you to thrive and contribute the best. And that seems almost obvious. Of course you would want that. But it stands in stark contrast to this idea that you really don't matter. The system matters and you're just a cog. And for me, the important thing is that we just have to remember that the existing social contract we have, the Standardization Covenant, we created. Nobody forced it on us. Like we agreed as a people, our great grandparents did, that this was an okay trade-off. And so we can remake it tomorrow if we want to.
So throughout the book, you give examples of these dark horses, people who gain success in very unconventional ways, where they've found fulfillment and purpose with their work. What are some notable examples? Who are some notable examples of some dark horses that you covered in the book?
So from the outset, it was funny because whenever we were thinking about these dark horses, the easy ones to figure out were all famous people. Right. And then like a Richard Branson, who I really like as a person. I think he's a great guy, and he is a classic example of a dark horse. But I grew up in rural America and in pretty poor. And for me, I said, I like these people, but I want to talk to everyday people who didn't have a lot of money and didn't have a ton of connections, but still managed to do this, because I thought if we focus there, would be likely to find patterns that would be useful for everyone. So that's what we did. So we tried really hard not to find any sort of name brands. But that said, we studied hundreds of people from all walks of life, as wide a range of professions as we could find. Everything from, experts at wine to embalmers, right? Like to, closet organizers. But, some of the people that were just remarkable, interestingly, they kind of break down into like two kinds of dark horses. The one that you're probably imagining is the one that they struggle early, they fail early, and then suddenly they just catch fire and they're amazing. And we found plenty of those. For example, like we talked to a woman who dropped out of school in high school, had a kid early on, was working in a fast food joint in her teens and early 20s. And you flash forward today, she's an internationally respected astronomer who has discovered a planet, discovered an asteroid, and did all of that, including publishing in like the journal Science, never having gone to college. She still doesn't even have a high school diploma. The other kind of dark horse that we found, which I think is even more general, were these people who were really actually fantastic at what they do. They were the people who you would say, boy, by society standards, they're successful, who reach a point in their life, they're like, I'm just not happy. I'm not fulfilled. And they make these incredible pivots into stuff that you're like, really? That's where you went? And then they go off and they just do amazing things and you still don't see them coming. So, for example, spoke to another woman who had actually, you would have thought was acing the standard path. She was raised by the classic tiger mom parents, and she finished high school at 15, finished college at 19, and then she landed a really sweet high profile job at one of the top consulting firms when she was 20. And she was like, had this just like stellar career right in front of her. Yet a few years later, she's wakes up and recognizes she's living a life based on her parents' view of success, and she's not happy. So she makes a decision to pursue what mattered to her, makes a pivot. Today, she is a chef and the mastermind behind one of the most acclaimed supper clubs in the country.
No, that's awesome. My favorite that you talk about, the highlight of the book, is the lady who, Susan. She's in a crappy marriage.
Yeah. She
went to a concert, and at that concert, she decided, I'm going to be a sound engineer.
Yeah.
And she went on this path that took, I think more than a decade.
Yep.
And she ended up being the Prince's, the artist formerly known as Prince, or is he now just Prince? Or
incredible, right?
The sound engineer for him.
And what I love, she's one of my favorite people in the world. This is one of the fun things about this project is you meet people and you don't want to be them. Like, I don't want to be a sound engineer, but knowing her makes me want to be a better person. She taught us that living a fulfilling life isn't all upsides. Sometimes you have to get yourself out of really bad, abusive relationships. There's a hole you're in. And that's the starting point. But she said, I don't even know why. She didn't want to be a performer. She knew that. And so she's like, I don't know, this sound engineer. But what's so interesting and we lay out in the book in greater detail, the kind of choices she's going to make to really live that kind of life, including being a secretary at the place where they train people because she couldn't afford to go, but she could get enough training and convincing the military to send her some technical manuals so that she could keep getting more training, and then just doing the things that need to be done. And then what I love is, there she is getting to share this moment actually back in the LA Coliseum where she left because her husband told her she had to be home in time or she was going to get beat. There she is with Prince back there enjoying this incredible success with Purple Rain. And to be able to live that life. And then as you see in the book, she goes on to do other things because she realizes this is a never ending process.
Yeah, she got her PhD and be a professor.
Yeah, and she went to school in her 40s because it was like, there's something, the next challenge. And that's what I love about this fulfillment orientation, which is these dark horses. I was always surprised. I really genuinely thought that to be a dark horse, to buck this standardized system, you would have to be someone like Richard Branson. I mean, I know Sir Richard. He's amazing. And he really loves bucking the system. I think it's just part of what really gets him off. If someone else wants him to do it, he's probably not going to do it. I thought that most people would have to be like that. You'd have to really be able to gut it out, and that's just not what we found. Instead, without fail, every one of these dark horses got on their own path because they bailed on society's view of success. They bailed on the standardization idea. And they, to a person, said, success to me is about pursuing fulfillment, accomplishing things that truly matter to me. And since we're so individual, the second you commit to that, it's unavoidable that you're actually going to have to get off the beaten path once in a while. And so just what we see is time and time again, these people being able to do that and creating very reliable paths. And so what I liked is it would be one thing to say, oh, cool, pursue fulfillment. That's the kind of life you want to live. But what you see with these dark horses is they reveal a set of things you need to know that when you know them, it makes it a very, very stable, reliable path to success and happiness.
Well, let's walk through how you can figure out what will bring you fulfillment. Because that means so I think one thing about making fulfillment your goal, it's great, but there's also, it's kind of can be a two-edged sword because you're like, man, that's a lot of pressure. Because it's existential. Sure. I think that's why some people find the standardization covenant comforting. It's like, well, here's this thing. It's already set for me. I don't have to really think about it. I'll just do it. So how can you figure out what will bring you fulfillment so you don't have that existential angst where you're like lying in bed and it's like, am I really doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah. Well, and look, the reality is that pursuing a fulfilling life does have more responsibility. There's no autopilot version of this. No one can give it to you. You have to earn it yourself. But I can almost guarantee you, like as someone who's a fan of what you all do, I'm going to go ahead and almost guarantee the people listening and the people on the website are people who actually care about this kind of stuff. Your self-improvement and trying to live their best life. So here's the thing. In the abstract, it can feel overwhelming because absent the reliable, even if it's not that great, sort of beacons that society gives us, what do we anchor around? So what we found is that there's really these 4 things that they know that make this work. And they'll sound pretty straightforward, but look, the first thing, and it's the most important thing, is you absolutely have to know what motivates you. And we call it micromotives in the book because it was incredible how individual they are. When you think of motives, you tend to think of a small number of them that are just big. Like, okay, wait, I'm competitive. Yeah, that's true. I'm pretty competitive, or I like money, or I like collaboration. But in reality, the things that truly get you up in the morning can be incredibly particular and subtle and may not really apply to really almost anybody else. For example, we talked to a guy who, I mean, no kidding, his primary motive, I mean, it's just incredible, was aligning physical objects with his hands. I actually, when we talked to him, I thought this can't be true. First of all, it doesn't sound remotely motivating to me at all. And it just seems so particular. Really, they must represent something more general, but it was really specific for him and it really mattered. And he'd been able to convert that into some engineering work that had been amazing, and then left that work and it fell apart on him. And then he came back in his life later and realized he's now like the top upholstery repair person in New York and he loves it. You got to know these things about yourself because you can be successful by society standards without knowing who you are and what matters, but you can't live a fulfilling life, not systematically, because it's about making choices and accomplishing things that matter to you. So the question would be like, well, then how do I start to figure out what motivates me? It seems And think about it, schools don't help. We never ask kids ever about what really matters to them. We tell them what they should care about. But what we found, and I'll give you the simple version here, and the book kind of elaborates more on it. The most, I mean, it will sound simple. I promise you, any listener that just puts this into play in their life will be shocked at how big of a return on investment you'll get. So it's simply like this. If you think about the things that you enjoy doing right now, whether they're at work, whether they're at home, recreation, whatever. If you start making a list of those things and ask yourself, why? Why do I like this? So my example, like, I love football, love it. I'm passionate about it. I played it when I could. I watch it every time. Like, luckily I'm in Boston, so I've got the Patriots for quite a few years. So it's a good run. But then it's why, right? What is it about? So is it because it's competition? Is it because it's outdoors? Is it because it's collaborative, a team sport? Is it because it's strategy involved? You and I could both like football for very, very different reasons. If you know the why, it's everything. Because if you do this a couple of times with the things that you enjoy, you'll start to see patterns. And those patterns become your real motives. And now that I know, if it's because I like collaboration and strategy, well, you know what? There's a whole bunch of other things that can also be fulfilling to me. And I understand how to find my way to those things.
I love it. And you gave the example that I liked in the book was someone who likes birds. Well, I just love birds. But you might like how birds look, and that could take you down one path. Or you might like how birds sound, and that could take someone down another path.
In effect, it did. As you're saying, it's so remarkable because they get so specific. And I'm like, really? There are actually people who end up becoming what we call birders. There's whole professions where people go out and discover birds, and they actually are really interesting and important careers. I, for the life of me, would be like, I would rather dig ditches. I can't even imagine that. But what we found is some people were like, no, all that matters to me is the visual aspect of it. They could care less how they sound. And then some people are like, I don't even want to see them. I need to hear them. And they could imagine the waveform of the sound. And it was funny, after we wrote the book, there was a more serious conversation going on in Australia about someone who wanted to actually was claiming they wanted to have assisted suicide and they had to leave the country. And one of the things the gentleman said, he was 100, and he said, "Look, I used to love birds. I've lost my sight, and all I can do is hear them, and I don't care about that. He'd rather end his life than have to just hear birds. It's what motivates us is incredibly specific." And nobody can tell you what it is, but you can figure it out for yourself. And when you start to get a hold of that, then suddenly making choices about your life becomes a heck of a lot easier. And that idea that feels scary, as if you're going to drive yourself off a cliff, suddenly doesn't feel as risky or scary anymore.
Well, that's the next step, choices. And this is all about finding fit for what motivates you.
Yeah.
And this is counterintuitive to, you kind of hear talk of this in the Standardization Covenant. You want to find a job where you fit, but it's you have to fit in a certain way, right? You have a predetermined choice, right? And you got to fit there. How is choosing differ in the Dark Horse Covenant?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we saw with Dark Horses with the role of choice that I think is super important to appreciate. The first is just simply that actually recognizing that choice is really important, because in the Standardization Covenant, we're actually actively discouraged. The number of real choices that we have in our life. If I go to the grocery store, I have a lot of choice because it's a market and people want to sell me stuff. But you think about the institutions that are about developing who you are, you have very, very few choices. And so what you end up doing is hoarding them when you get them, and you hedge, and it's I don't want to make a mistake on this one. What college am I going to go to? What major will I have, right? What's my first job? Dark horses they look for choice everywhere, that even small ones, and they recognize that there's never such thing as just an equivalent option. One choice is always going to be closer to fulfillment than the other, and they make them. They don't hedge. They figure out what the thing is, and then they jump in and do it. And look, when they're not always right, there were plenty of examples where people said, wow, that just didn't turn out to be the right thing, but they learn from it and they make a better choice next time. And so what's fascinating about that is that from the outside, it looks like they're just taking risky bets. It just really does. Even when we were talking, I'm like, wow, you sold everything and went to rural England to learn about horticulture. And you were like, wow, that seems like there could have been a better way to do that. Because from our perspective, we don't know their motives. We don't know their individuality. And so we're applying this very averaged lens to it. What are the odds that someone, like if we say that you want to be a programmer, we say, well, only 1 in 10 people get a job in Silicon Valley, and you tell me, hey, I'm going to move to Silicon Valley because I'm going to get a job as a software engineer. And I'd say, boy, that seems like a really risky choice. 1 in 10? Well, that's just playing the odds across everybody. And what dark horses do is because they know their individuality, they can accurately judge fit better. So it's not 1 in 10. If you know what motivates you and what you're good at, and you understand the job that's there, it's not a guarantee, but you can know, like, actually, I have a really good shot at being great at this. And so we see them recognizing choices and making them. And then the third aspect of it is, and this was actually pretty cool to me, and it was like eye-opening, is that often when we think about choice, we think about the choices that people show us. That actually, okay, you can do X or you can do Y. And we're like, oh, cool, that's choice. Well, not really. That's just picking. They've already decided what the options are. But it's a little bit like, the first time you go to like a burger joint and they're like, oh, well, you can get on the menu, and then you realize there's a whole off menu that they're not telling you, but if you ask for it, you can get it, These dark horses show us this over and over again, that in fact, it's not just about doing what people give you, it's actually making your own options. Like I said, like the Susan Rogers, if she wants to be trained as a sound engineer, well, go to one of the schools that trained you. Well, that's not open to her. So she's going to work her way through to be a secretary at the place and make a deal that she can sit in on classes when they're available. That wasn't an on-menu option, but she's going to figure it out.
And I think one concern that people have who have that have grown up in the Standardization Covenant, and the parents of these individuals, is that if they go off this off-path route, like, they're not going to be able to support themselves. They're not going to have health insurance. It's going to be super risky. But like Susan's a great example. Like, she found a job where she could, pay the rent, pay for food, but at the same time, she was learning a skill. She got her foot in the door. And I think that was, you made that a good point. Like, a lot of these dark horses, they weren't just like these like careless daredevil risk-taking type. They were actually just very smart about taking smart risks.
It's exactly right. So once you see their paths through the dark horse lens, and you start to know about who they are, and then you look at the choices they're making, you go, oh, that's really, really, that's smart. That's a very clever, you've minimized actual risk. The riskier thing is to put yourself in a situation that is like a terrible fit for who you are, and then hope that things turn out. But to your point, I think it's really important that when we think about things like fulfillment, if we're not careful, it can be interpreted as like just this very selfish, free riding kind of like, do your thing and it doesn't really matter. It was never the case. Not only is it not okay, you have a responsibility to be responsible. And when you look at the way that dark horses made choices, what was interesting is you're trying to maximize fit. That's the first thing. But then what was really cool, and I think this is really valuable for all of us, is you can play a little game of, can I live with the worst case scenario of this choice? So, nowadays I have 2 kids, which means I have some financial responsibility. There are things that are no longer options for me because of the life I chose to live and I want to live. So if I have a chance to make a jump, but one of those worst case scenarios is losing everything and my family suffers, then I'm gonna pass on that one because I'm unwilling to live with the worst case scenario. And then what you do is you go to the next best fit. And what they keep doing is saying, how do I get to that place where I can live with the worst case scenario and I have a good fit? And so as a parent, I look at that as well now, and I think, so how do I know that my boys who, are college and since graduated, like, how do I know the things they're doing right now are actually a path of fulfillment or just screwing off? And for me, it always comes back to that idea of taking responsibility for the choices. So when I think of the classic case of, moving to Los Angeles to be an actor, and parents are like, oh my goodness, this is going to be the end. What I would ask them is like, okay, wait, it's one thing if they're in LA, they've got 7 roommates, they're bussing tables in the evening, and they're making it work. Even though for you go, wow, that just seems like you're struggling. That's a sign that this is a fulfilling path. Either they're going to learn something or it's going to work out. If on the other hand, they're like, Mom, Dad, can you pay my rent? Mom, Dad, can you get me a car? Can you that's not fulfillment, right? And it won't turn into it. So this idea of knowing who you are and being willing to take responsibility for the choices is a really important sign that you're on the right path.
All right. So a dark horse, they don't pick, they choose. And choice means sometimes coming up with your own choice that no one never saw before. So look for micro motivations. Choose occupations that fit you and your micro motivations, or maybe and also your current circumstance. If you have kids, you might have to, the job might not fit you anymore because of you have that obligation to them. The next step is know your strategies.
Yeah, this is. I get excited about this because this one just confronts head on this ridiculous myth in our society about the nature of talent. The way we've been taught in our existing system is you try things, and when you're not good at them, the response is, well, maybe I'm not cut out for that. Maybe I'm not, that good at it, and I'm going to move on. I mean, that's a simplistic explanation, but I think it's close. What we saw with dark horses, and it was so remarkable, is once they've figured out what they care about and they've made a choice, well, you still have to accomplish things. It's not passive. So now you got to get good at stuff. You got to get good at things that you care about. And what they would do is they know they care about this, so they're not going to let go of it. And what you'd see is they'll try a strategy and then it doesn't work. They'll just keep cycling through strategies. And from the outside, it looks incredibly inefficient, but they're not doing the same thing over and over again. They'll just keep swapping out new strategies until the one that clicks, and it clicks and they go. And what they teach you is that real achievement is not about some innate talent. It is about the right fit between your individuality and a strategy. And there are always multiple ways to get to that finish line, always. What I love about it is it completely changes how I think about how I'm going to make progress as an individual. And it was just, we saw in everything from Rubik's Cubes to Master Psalms, how you're going to pass the hardest test in the world, basically. Almost nobody does it the same way. It's just incredible.
But one thing I've noticed, particularly since I'm online, I kind of interact with like the online business world, online entrepreneurs, where you have these people talking about living an unconventional life, and they're whatever, but they're still looking for a strategy that sort of fits the standardized covenant. Like they're looking for like the thing that's like it'll work no matter what. They buy courses, pay thousands of dollars for this online course. Like follow these 10 steps and you will be successful in your unconventional life.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, that's why when we see that happen, it's always an indicator that you're actually lacking a deeper understanding of who you are, because as you truly understand that becomes the anchor that you can say, look, I know this isn't going to work. And if you don't really have a good understanding of yourself, then you will fall back on, let me just see how society tells me to do this, because what's your substitute? If you find yourself relying on the tried and true because you're hoping, you're just playing the odds at that point, it's okay. Just step back and realize you got more work to do on understanding what truly matters to you and what you're good at.
Yeah, when I get asked quite a bit, like, how do I start a podcast and make it successful? And it's like, man, I don't know. Like, I start 10 years ago, because like the internet was completely different when I started, and I don't know what worked for me is probably not going to work for you. Just I don't know.
But think about what you did. So this is what I think is so remarkable. So you obviously have lots of success, but I'm going to go ahead and wager that this was not there's not a blueprint. You knew you cared about it and you got started. And you make choices and you learn from people. You look at other folks and you think you always want to take advice. And then you got to do stuff that works for you and try it out and let go of stuff that doesn't. And that sort of authenticity to who you are becomes fundamental to your ability to be as good as possible at what you're doing.
Well, another part of this dark horse covenant sort of tactic is you have to ignore the destination, which is like completely counter from the standardization covenant, where you have to know, when you're, like you said, like your kids, when they're 8 years old, they're getting asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like they know their destination. With a dark horse, they typically don't.
I think what's really important here is destination isn't the same thing as goals. You should have goals. But goals, when they're useful, are we call them like SMART goals, specific, measurable, actionable, whatever. Yeah, it's one thing to say okay, I want to start a podcast. Well, there's certain things I need to get better at. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to learn how to interview. I'm going to learn how to whatever. Okay. But yeah, if you start talking about things that are 10, 15 years out, that are contingent on a bunch of other things, first of all, that destination, I guarantee you won't look like that by the time you get there. The other thing is it may be an actual terrible fit for who you really are. And so what dark horses do, and I think is, I mean, just profoundly important, is by ignoring, you'd never hear them say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Say, that's just a dumb question, because it will corrupt your decision-making process. Because the second I latch on to something far in the distant, and I don't really know why I'm doing it, I lose sight of the fact that every single day I have choices to make. Every day. We all do, big and small. And they need to be made based on a real understanding of who you are, what matters to you, what motivates you. And it is that consistent ability to make those kind of choices that will carve out your path, that'll give you the best chance to be excellent because you are fulfilled. The quickest way to wreck that is to pick what society's telling you to be 10 years from now and start making choices based on that.
Yeah, I think you quoted Paul Graham in the book. He says a lot of the successful entrepreneurs that he's encountered, they don't have 10-year plans. Like they've got a goal. They're looking at the next goal. That's pretty much it.
Of course, right? Like that. It's how the truth is anybody that's been successful, this is how you become really successful. And it's only in hindsight that it all looks like it's stitched together in some perfect preordained plan. But the reality is the most important choices most of us make when we feel like we're leading successful lives are these incredible twists and turns that you just never would have thought would be there for you. And you would have been blind to had you not been looking for them.
Right. You use the concept of gradient ascent. It's like how people can climb mountains.
Yeah,
right?
isn't that that's we couldn't help it. At the end of the day, we're scientists, and we had to slip back into, when we think about how we model complex problems that don't have solutions, it feels intractable. But actually, the thing called gradient ascent in computer science, it turns out you can find the answer to anything. You just have the algorithm take a few steps in a direction, look around and say, look, am I making progress toward the peak or am I going down? And if you're making progress, go forward again. You can make that step-by-step process and actually maximize a mathematical solution. And it actually, I think, is a good metaphor for life. You don't actually have to already know the peak you're aiming for in order to get there. You just don't.
And what's nice about this sort of 4 ways to figure out the thing that'll bring you fulfillment, it's very fluid, right? It's not like, your micromotives could change as you get older. Like
Sure.
what your micromotives were when you're 20 might be different when you're 35.
For sure. And what's nice is that, and I hope they are, what a boring life if the exact same thing. What I think is really powerful about this is, I have a colleague and friend who I was just with a couple of days ago who was explaining that, forever she was in love with spreadsheets. Like that was her thing. And she said she woke up one day after like a decade of being awesome at this stuff in her work and was like, I can't touch another spreadsheet. I literally just hate it. It was like her spreadsheet moment. Now, had she not understood that it wasn't about spreadsheets, it was actually about, there's a logic to what it was doing. So it was the logic that she liked. So she was able to immediately like, you know what? Great. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to do something different. So she was able to engineer this consistent fulfillment, even though the environment's changing. And so this sense of understanding that that's how fulfillment works allows you, like if you're in a job and they're like, well, the job's done. You loved it. You thought you'd find a perfect fit. Guess what? If you have a good understanding of these basic principles, you can make the next move. Similarly, if suddenly I'm just like, you know what? I'm not as competitive as I used to be. Okay, well, I can be aware of that because I'm feeling it. I can feel it in my day-to-day experience. I can reassess and I can make a new choice. So to me, this understanding of pursuing fulfillment to achieve excellence puts so much control in an individual's hands. Regardless of circumstances, you can carve out a fulfilling life.
And it sounds like you can even apply this in professions that have that more standardization covenant hierarchy, like a doctor or an attorney or a corporate suit.
Yeah, even when the gatekeeping aspect is really rigid, it's super hard. You're not becoming a doctor without going through some specific things. We see it all the time is when you get into the profession, you realize, well, it's almost crazy that we call it the same thing. The range of things you could do and still be a lawyer is remarkable. And so the ability to still say, like, even though I've come through the straight and narrow because I had to, I can still keep optimizing even within that profession in ways that can be everything from completely unsatisfying to incredibly fulfilling.
And what's nice about that, I think this idea is it takes pressure off young people, or it can take pressure off young people. They really understand it. It's like, okay, you're 24, you don't have to have this all figured out now. You have a long time to figure. It's like a lifetime process.
It is a process. I mean, that almost seems cliche, but it really is. And the thing is that I feel like, and with my own kids, I mean, this is always the litmus test for me: is do I really want them to live by this book? And I can honestly say yes. I feel extremely confident that this is a way for them to live the kind of life they want to live. It's empowering. It can be a little scary. Like I said, you lose sight of the things that you've been told all your life are the sure signs of how you have success. But once you get into the habit of this, of being true to who you are and learning how to make choices and learn from them quick, not only do you end up places that are just super interesting and successful, but the journey is actually interesting. It's actually enjoyable. And I think nowadays, what more could you ever want as a person or as a parent than to have yourself or your children be able to have a life that is that rich and meaningful?
So we got the Standardization Covenant. It was created to benefit institutions. It allows us to educate a lot of people at once, hire people a bunch of people at once. But then you have this Dark Horse Covenant that's very focused on the individual and it's personalized. So there's sort of this conflict there. How do you think we can resolve that, particularly in the world of education, where you grow up, you get put into a system where you're sitting in the desk, the teacher lectures the same thing to all the kids. How can you develop a dark horse education within that system?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, under this new covenant, the truth is what we're changing now is the purpose of these systems. You take something like education. The purpose of education is actually to batch process kids and sort them into predetermined outcomes that society has said they want. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what we do. It doesn't mean we don't have amazing teachers, doesn't mean we have caring adults, but it is the purpose of the system. If you now want a system who sees its job to understand and help develop each kid to their full potential, and more importantly, help these kids figure this out for themselves, that's a very different system. And now you could almost think like, well, that seems impossible. But the good news is with my think tank, I mean, we actually engage in this kind of systems change work every day. There are some remarkable things going on. And at the core of this big change in the purpose of education is actually a focus on more personalized systems that care about individuality. And this is almost crazy to me because what's odd is we figured out how to personalize almost every other aspect of our lives. But when it comes to our kids and their education, we seem shockingly content with the status quo, but we shouldn't. Our education system doesn't match our capabilities for personalization. And frankly, we're letting our kids down right now.
So, I mean, what are some things that have been done just sort of a highlight of some of those things?
Yeah, no, look, I am wildly optimistic about where our public education system will be in a decade or so. Like we know the purpose is wrong. We're trying like crazy. We have the tech to be able to do something different. So here's the handful of things that have to shift that are shifting. I'll tell you the one that I think is must have and is already happening, which is you have to shift toward what we call mastery learning, which means allowing kids to learn at their own pace until they truly understand the material rather than just passing kids from grade to grade as long as they don't fail. And the good news is that mastery learning is already taking hold all around the country. In fact, there's actually, you think about something like Khan Academy, where basically anyone can do that online and schools use it all the time. But you go to something like the state of Idaho, which is literally committing to making mastery learning the core of how things happen. And what's so great about it is when you shift away from a fixed amount of time and then you just rank kids with a grade to mastery learning, what we see without fail is that kids turn out to be just far more capable than we ever imagined. That like with just a little more time and support, what one kid can do academically, most kids can do. And so for me, that's not only good for the individual. When you think about the kind of talent we're about to unleash with a system that's focused on mastery, it makes me pretty hopeful about the future.
Well, Todd, this has been a great conversation. Is there someplace people can go to learn more about the book and your work?
Sure. You could go to toddrose.com or you can follow me on Twitter at @LToddRose.
Fantastic. Well, Todd Rose, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
My guest today was Todd Rose. He's the co-author of the book Dark Horse. It's available on Amazon.com and bookstores everywhere. You can find out more information about his work at his website, toddrose.com. That's Todd with 2 Ds. Also, check out our show notes at aom.is/darkhorse, where you can find links to resources where you can delve deeper into this topic.